Welcome back, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's course on a tribute to His Holiness Abdu'l-Baha. Dear friends, we are picking back up on Hassan Baliuzi's immortal work, Abdu'l-Baha, the Center of the Covenant of Baha'u'llah. Dear friends, we are on Chapter 24, The Passing of Abdu'l-Baha. The night of July 10th, 1921, Abdu'l-Baha was on Mount Carmel by the shrine of the Bab. There he revealed a tablet and a prayer in honor of a kinsman of the Bab, who had died recently. Abdu'l-Baha beseeched God in that prayer for his own release from this world. He spoke of his loneliness, of being broken-winged, submerged in seas of sorrows. O Lord, my bones are weakened and the hoar hairs glisten on my head, and I have now reached old age. Failing in my powers, no strength is there left in me wherewith to arise and serve thy loved ones. O Lord, my Lord, hasten my ascension unto thy sublime threshold, and my arrival at the door of thy grace beneath the shadow of thy most great mercy. That prayer was answered less than 5 months later. He passed away in the early hours of November 28th. The physician who was summoned to his bedside at that hour and closed his eyes was Dr. Florian Krug of New York, the same man who once bitterly resented the faith of Baha'u'llah and wanted alienists to examine his wife because of her intense devotion to it. He had now come a pilgrim with his wife, and Abdu'l-Baha had allocated them a room in the compound of his own house. A special announcement issued in the morning by the family of Abdu'l-Baha and the Baha'is of Haifa gave the public the news of his passing and of the funeral arrangements for the following day. However, early on Monday morning, the news of this sudden calamity had spread over the city, causing an unprecedented stir and tumult, and filling all hearts with unutterable grief. In the afternoon, this statement appeared: "We all belong unto God, and unto Him do we all return." The Islamic Association announces with much regret the passing of the highly learned, greatly erudite, generous benefactor, His Eminence Abdu'l-Baha Abbas. His bier will be carried from his home tomorrow, Tuesday, at 9 o'clock in the morning. You are requested to accept this announcement as a special invitation to assemble for his funeral procession. May God immerse him in His boundless mercy and grant solace unto his family and his people. In the land that we know as the Holy Land, in all its turbulent history of the last 2,000 years, there had never been an event which could unite all its inhabitants of diverse faiths and origins and purposes in a single expression of thought and feeling as did the passing of Abdu'l-Baha. Jews and Christians and Muslims and Druzes of all persuasions and denominations, Arabs and Turks and Kurds and Armenians, and other ethnic groups were united in mourning his passing, in being aware of a great loss they had suffered. In a private memorandum sent from 61 St. James's Street, London, SW1, Major Tudor Pole wrote, "On Tuesday, 29th of November, 1921, at 9:30 a.m., a cablegram addressed Cyclometry, London, reached this office. It had been dispatched from Haifa at 3 p.m. on 28th November 1921 and contained the following momentous news. His Holiness Abdu'l-Baha ascended to the Kingdom of Abha. Please inform friends. Signed, Greatest Holy Leaf." Friends in London were notified immediately by wire, telephone, and letter, and a cablegram was dispatched to the Holy Family at Haifa, expressing the sorrowing, loving sympathy of all the friends in this country. Cables were sent to the High Commissioner and Sir Wyndham Deeds at Jerusalem, and every step was taken by the British authorities in Palestine to show respect for the memory of the beloved departed and to render any services required by the family and the Baha'i community at Haifa and Acre. At the suggestion of Ziaullah Asgharzadeh, a cable was dispatched to the Baha'i community at Asgharabad. Obviously refers to Ashgabat in Central South Asia, near the Persian frontier, notifying the friends of the Master's ascension and conveying the love and sympathy of friends in every part of the world. In order to ensure the delivery of this cable, arrangements were made with the American Red Cross authorities and the British Trade Mission at Moscow to persuade the Soviet Foreign Minister to allow this important message to be telegraphed onto Ashgharabad. Lord Lamington, when wiring his condolences, advised this office that he had asked the Colonial Office to arrange for British representation at the Master's funeral. General Sir Arthur Money, KCB, KBE, CSI, formerly Chief Administrator of Palestine, writing on February 12, 1921, said, "I am grieved to learn of the death of Abdu'l-Baha. I had a strong regard and admiration for him, and always valued his advice. He exercised all his influence in Palestine for good, and was always ready to assist the administration toward the establishment of law and order." In New York, Roy Wilhelm received this cable from Haifa on November 28th. Wilhelmite, New York, His Holiness Abdu'l-Baha ascended to Abha Kingdom. Inform friends, Greatest Holy Leaf. And from the United States, this message went out to the Holy Land on behalf of the Executive Board of the Baha'i Temple Unity. He doeth whatsoever he willeth. Hearts weep at most great tribulation. American friends send through Unity Board radiant love, boundless sympathy, devotion. Standing steadfast, conscious of his unceasing presence and nearness. The Baha'is of Tehran sent the following message through their spiritual assembly to the Baha'is of America and Britain. Light of covenant transferred from eye to heart. day of teaching unity, self-sacrifice. The valiant Baha'is of Germany sent this cable to the greatest holy leaf. All believers deeply moved by irrevocable loss of our Master's precious life. We pray for heavenly protection of holy cause and promise faithfulness and obedience to center of covenant. Winston Churchill, the Secretary of State for the Colonies, cabled the High Commissioner for Palestine to convey to the Baha'i community, on behalf of His Majesty's government, their sympathy and condolence on the death of Sir Abdu'l-Baha Abbas, KBE. Viscount Allenby, the High Commissioner for Egypt, wired the following message on November 29th, also through the intermediary of Sir Herbert Samuel, the High Commissioner for Palestine. Please convey to the relatives of the late Sir Abdu'l-Baha Abbas Effendi and to the Baha'i community my sincere sympathy in the loss of their revered leader. Another message which came through the office of the High Commissioner for Palestine was from the Commander-in-Chief of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force. General Congreve begs that you will convey his deepest sympathy to the family of the late Sir Abbas al-Baha'i. The Council of Ministers in Baghdad forwarded this message, dated December 8th. His Highness Sayyid Abdur-Rahman, the Prime Minister, desires to extend his sympathy to the family of His Holiness Abdu'l-Baha in their bereavement. For the Holy Family, Theosophical Society send affectionate thoughts was another message which came from London. A leading figure of the town of Nazareth wired, "With the profoundest sorrow and regret, we condole with you on the occasion of the setting of the day star of the East. We are of God, and to Him we shall return." Many more were the messages of condolence that reached the family of Abdu'l-Baha. Shohreh Effendi and Lady Blomfield wrote, in the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, "We have now come to realize that the Master knew the day and hour when, his mission on earth being finished, he would return to the shelter of heaven. He was, however, careful that his family should not have any premonition of the coming sorrow. It seemed as though their eyes were veiled by him with his ever-loving consideration for his dear ones, that they should not see the significance of certain dreams and other signs of the culminating event. This they now realize was his thought for them, in order that their strength might be preserved to face the great ordeal when it should arrive, that they should not be devitalized by anguish of mind in its anticipation. Out of the many signs of the approach of the hour, when he could say of his work on earth, 'It is finished,' the following two dreams seem remarkable. Less than 8 weeks before his passing, the Master related this to his family. "I seemed to be standing within a great mosque, in the place of the Imam himself. I became aware that a large number of people were flocking into the mosque, more and yet more crowded in, taking their places in rows behind me. until there was a vast multitude. As I stood, I raised loudly the call to prayer. Suddenly the thought came to me to go forth from the mosque. When I found myself outside, I said within myself, "For what reason came I forth, not having led the prayer?" But it matters not. Now that I have uttered the call to prayer, the vast multitude will of themselves chant the prayer. A few weeks after the preceding dream, the master came in from the solitary room in the garden, which he had occupied of late, and said, "I dreamed a dream, and behold, the blessed beauty came and said unto me, Destroy this room." The family, who had been wishing that he would come and sleep in the house, not being happy that he should be alone at night, exclaimed, "Yes, master, we think your dream means that you should leave that room and come into the house." When he heard this from us, he smiled meaningly, as though not agreeing with our interpretation. Afterwards, we understood that by the room was meant the temple of his body. A month before his last hour, Dr. Suleiman Rafat Bey, a Turkish friend who was a guest in the house, received a telegram telling him of the sudden death of his brother. Abdu'l-Baha, speaking words of comfort to him, whispered, "Sorrow not, for he is only transferred from this plane to a higher one. I too shall soon be transferred, for my days are numbered." Then patting him gently on the shoulder, he looked him in the face and said, "And it will be in the days that are shortly to come." In the same week, he revealed a tablet to America, in which is the following prayer: Ya Baha'u'llah Pa, O thou the glory of glories, I have renounced the world and the people thereof, and am heartbroken and sorely afflicted because of the unfaithful. In the cage of this world I flutter even as a frightened bird, and yearn every day to take my flight unto thy kingdom. Ya Baha'u'llah Pa, make me to drink of the cup of sacrifice, and set me free. Relieve me from these woes and trials, from these afflictions and troubles. Thou art he that aideth, that succoureth, that protecteth, that stretcheth forth the hand of help. On the last Friday morning of his stay on earth, November 25th, he said to his daughters, "The wedding of Khusra must take place today. If you are too much occupied, I myself will make the necessary preparations, for it must take place this day." Abdu'l-Baha attended the noonday prayer at the mosque. When he came out, he found the poor waiting for the alms, which it was his custom to give every Friday. This day, as usual, he stood in spite of very great fatigue, whilst he gave a coin to every one with his own hands. After lunch, he dictated some tablets, his last ones, to Ruhi Effendi. When he had rested, he walked in the garden. He seemed to be in a deep reverie. His good and faithful servant, Ismail Agha relates the following. Sometime about 20 days before my master passed away, I was near the garden when I heard him summon an old believer saying, "Come with me that we may admire together the beauty of the garden. Behold what the spirit of devotion is able to achieve." This flourishing place was, a few years ago, but a heap of stones, and now it is verdant with foliage and flowers. My desire is that after I am gone, the loved ones may all arise to serve the divine cause, and please God, so it shall be. Ere long men will arise who shall bring life to the world. A few days after this he said, "I am so fatigued. The hour is come when I must leave everything and take my flight. I am too weary to walk." Then he said, "It was during the closing days of the Blessed Beauty, when I was engaged in gathering together his papers, which were strewn over the sofa in his writing chamber at Bahji, that he turned to me and said, 'It is of no use to gather them. I must leave them and flee away. I also have finished my work. I can do nothing more. Therefore must I leave it and take my departure.'" 3 days before his ascension, whilst seated in the garden, he called me and said, "I am sick with fatigue. Bring 2 of your oranges for me, that I may eat them for your sake." This I did, and he, having eaten them, turned to me saying, "Have you any of your sweet lemons?" He bade me fetch a few. Whilst I was plucking them, he came over to the tree saying, "Nay, but I must gather them with my own hands." Having eaten of the fruit, he turned to me and asked, "Do you desire anything more?" Then, with a pathetic gesture of his hands, he touchingly, empathetically, and deliberately said, "Now it is finished. It is finished." These significant words penetrated my very soul. I felt each time he uttered them as if a knife were struck into my heart. I understood his meaning, but never dreamed his end was so nigh. It was Ismail Agha, who had been the master's gardener for well nigh 30 years, who, in the first week after his bereavement, driven by hopeless grief, quietly disposed of all his belongings, made his will, went to the master's sister, and craved her pardon for any misdeeds he had committed. He then delivered the key of the garden to a trusted servant of the household, and taking with him means whereby to end his life at his beloved master's tomb, walked up the mountain to that sacred place, 3 times circled round it, and would have succeeded in taking his life, had it not been for the opportune arrival of a friend, who reached him in time to prevent the accomplishment of his tragic intention. Later in the evening of Friday, he, Abdu'l-Baha, blessed the bride and bridegroom, who had just been married. He spoke impressively to them. "Khosra," he said, "you have spent your childhood and youth in the service of this house. It is my hope that you will grow old under the same roof, ever and always serving God." During the evening, he attended the usual meeting of the friends in his own audience chamber. In the morning of Saturday, November 26, he arose early, came to the tea room, and had some tea. He asked for the fur-lined coat which had belonged to Baha'u'llah. He often put on this coat when he was cold or did not feel well. He so loved it. He then withdrew to his room, lay down on his bed, and said, "Cover me up. I am very cold. Last night I did not sleep well. I felt cold. This is serious. It is the beginning." After more blankets had been put on, he asked for the fur coat he had taken off to be placed over him. That day he was rather feverish. In the evening his temperature rose still higher. It reached 104 degrees Fahrenheit. But during the night, the fever left him. After midnight, he asked for some tea. On Sunday morning, November 27th, he said, "I am quite well, and will get up as usual and have tea with you in the tea room." After he had dressed, he was persuaded to remain on the sofa in his room. In the afternoon, he sent all the friends up to the tomb of the Bab, where on the occasion of the anniversary of the declaration of the covenant, a feast was being held, offered by a Parsi pilgrim, who had lately arrived from India. At 4 in the afternoon, being on the sofa in his room, he said, "Ask my sister and all the family to come and have tea with me." After tea, the Mufti of Haifa and the head of the municipality with another visitor were received by him. They remained about an hour. He spoke to them about Baha'u'llah, related to them his second dream, showed them extraordinary kindness, and even more than his usual courtesy. He then bade them farewell, walking with them to the outer door in spite of their pleading that he should remain resting on his sofa. He then received a visit from the head of the police, an Englishman who, too, had his share of the master's gracious kindness. To him he gave some silk hand-woven Persian handkerchiefs, which he very greatly appreciated. His 4 sons-in-law and Ruhi Effendi came to him after returning from the gathering on the mountain. They said to him, "The giver of the feast was unhappy because you were not there." He said unto them, "But I was there. Though my body was absent, my spirit was there in your midst. I was present with the friends at the tomb. The friends must not attach any importance to the absence of my body. In spirit I am, and shall always be with the friends, even though I be far away." The same evening he asked after the health of every member of the household, of the pilgrims, and of the friends in Haifa. "Very good, he said, when told that none were ill. This was his very last utterance concerning his friends. At 8 in the evening, he retired to bed, after taking a little nourishment, saying, "I am quite well." He told all the family to go to bed and rest. 2 of his daughters, however, stayed with him. That night, the master had gone to sleep very calmly, quite free from fever. He woke about 1:15 a.m., got up, and walked across to a table, where he drank some water. He took off an outer night garment, saying, "I am too warm." He went back to bed, and when his daughter Ruha Khanum later on approached, she found him lying peacefully, and as he looked into her face, he asked her to lift up the net curtain, saying, "I have difficulty in breathing. Give me more air." Some rose water was brought, of which he drank, sitting up in bed to do so, without any help. He again lay down, and as some food was offered him, he remarked in a clear and distinct voice, "You wish me to take some food, and I am going?" He gave them a beautiful look. His face was so calm, his expression so serene, they thought him asleep. His long martyrdom was ended. When Dr. Florian Krug was summoned quickly and arrived hastily, Abdu'l-Baha had gone from the gaze of his loved ones. Grace and Florian Krug, Louise and John Bosch from California, Ethel Rosenberg from London, and Fraulein Johanna Hoff from Stuttgart were the Western pilgrims present in Haifa at that poignant hour, as well as Curtis Kelsey from the United States, who was in Haifa to attend to electrical installations in the Shrine of the Bab. Soon after Abdu'l-Baha had passed out of this world, Western pilgrims were allowed into the room where his body lay. Louise Bosch wrote on December 5th to Ella Cooper, "At first we were as dumb and speechless, bewildered. We stood or kneeled before the bed. We gazed upon his face and could not trust our eyes. At last the bewilderment subsided, and the trust asserted itself. Was it true that his eyes would not open no more? Would he not open his eyes to look upon us again? Would he not open his lips to say that he was not dead? We asked the doctors, by then other physicians had been sent for, if he was dead. They said yes, the heart had ceased to beat. They said it was useless to try to revive him. It could not be done. Then, after a while, the mosquito netting over the bed was let down, and this covered from our eyes the earthly remains of our Lord. We got up and went into the adjacent room, and the door of the room out of which we came was closed. But before this, the blood of the wounds of this blow had begun to flow, and the hurt and the pain and the moans increased with every minute. We 5 European pilgrims were in the room together with the Holy Family, and the Holy Mother held my husband's hand. and the greatest holy leaf held mine. After a time, we went back to the pilgrim's house, leaving the Holy Family alone. It was still night, no moon at all. Not long afterward, the dawn broke, and at last the sun rose with great effulgence over the scene of this memorable night. In the words of Shoghi Effendi and Lady Blomfield, the eyes that had always looked out with loving kindness upon humanity, whether friends or foes, were now closed. The hands that had ever been stretched forth to give alms to the poor and the needy, the halt and the maimed, the blind, the orphan, and the widow, had now finished their labor. The feet that, with untiring zeal, had gone upon the ceaseless errands of the Lord of Compassion, were now at rest. The lips that had so eloquently championed the cause of the suffering sons of men were now hushed in silence. The heart that had so powerfully throbbed with wondrous love for the children of God was now stilled. His glorious spirit had passed from the life of earth, from the persecutions of the enemies of righteousness, from the storm and stress of well nigh 80 years of indefatigable toil for the good of others. Sorrow and anguish were most intense, but decisions had to be taken, preparations had to be made. First of all, where was to be the resting place of the earthly remains of Abdu'l-Baha? It was remembered that there was another vault next to the vault where the remains of the Bab lay. The greatest holy leaf decided that Abdu'l-Baha's tomb should be there. A coffin was expeditiously obtained, and John Bosch assisted the son-in-law of Abdu'l-Baha to place his body in the coffin. But so hurriedly had the coffin been made that its lid could not be properly secured. The night following the interment, Lutfullah Hakim sat in the vault and kept watch until the deficiency could be righted. The funeral of Abdu'l-Baha was indeed a funeral the like of which the Holy Land had never witnessed. The High Commissioner of Palestine, Sir Herbert Samuel, the Governor of Jerusalem, the Governor of Phoenicia, the chief officials of the government, the consuls of the various countries resident in Haifa, the heads of the various religious communities, the notables of Palestine, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druzes, Egyptians, Greeks, Turks, Kurds, and a host of his American, European, and native friends, men, women, and children, both of high and low degree, all about 10,000 in number, mourning the loss of their beloved one. This impressive, triumphal procession was headed by a guard of honor, consisting of the city constabulary force, followed by the Boy Scouts of the Muslim and Christian communities, holding aloft their banners, a company of Muslim choristers chanting their verses from the Quran, the chiefs of the Muslim community, headed by the Mufti, a number of Christian priests, Latin, Greek, and Anglican, all preceding the sacred coffin, upraised on the shoulders of his loved ones. Immediately behind it came the members of his family. Next to them walked the British High Commissioner, the governor of Jerusalem, and the governor of Phoenicia. After them came the consuls and the notables of the land, followed by the vast multitude of those who reverenced and loved him. On this day there was no cloud in the sky, nor any sound in all the town and surrounding country through which they went, save only the soft, slow, rhythmic chanting of Islam in the call to prayer, or the convulsed sobbing moan of those helpless ones, bewailing the loss of their one friend, who had protected them in all their difficulties and sorrows, whose generous bounty had saved them and their little ones from starvation through the terrible years of the great woe. "O God, my God," the people wailed with one accord, "our Father has left us! Our Father has left us!" Oh, the wonder of that great throng, peoples of every religion and race and color, united in heart through the manifestation of servitude in the lifelong work of Abdu'l-Baha. As they slowly wended their way up Mount Carmel, the vineyard of God, the casket appeared in the distance to be borne aloft by invisible hands. So high above the heads of the people was it carried. After 2 hours walking, they reached the garden of the tomb of the Bab. Tenderly was the sacred coffin placed upon a plain table, covered with a fair white linen cloth. As the vast concourse pressed round the tabernacle of his body, waiting to be laid in its resting place within the vault, next to that of the Bab, representatives of the various denominations, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, all hearts being ablaze with fervent love of Abdu'l-Baha, some on the impulse of the moment, others prepared, raised their voices in eulogy and regret, paying their last homage of farewell to their loved one. So united were they in their acclamation of him as the wise educator and reconciler of the human race in this perplexed and sorrowful age, that there seemed to be nothing left for the Baha'is to say. The following are extracts from some of the speeches delivered on that memorable occasion. The first speaker was Yusuf Al-Khattab, a well-known Muslim orator. He said, "O concourse of Arabians and Persians, whom are ye bewailing? Is it he who but yesterday was great in his life, and is today in his death greater still? Shed no tears for the one that hath departed to the world of eternity, but weep over the passing of virtue and wisdom, of knowledge and generosity. Lament for yourselves, for yours is the loss, whilst he, your lost one, is but a revered wayfarer, stepping from your mortal world into the everlasting home. Weep 1 hour for the sake of him who, for well nigh 80 years, hath wept for you. Look to your right, look to your left, look east and look west, and behold, what glory and greatness have vanished. What a pillar of peace hath crumbled. What eloquent lips are hushed. Alas, in this tribulation there is no heart but aches with anguish, no eye but is filled with tears. Woe unto the poor, for lo, goodness hath departed from them. Woe unto the orphans, for their loving father is no more with them. Could the life of Sir Abdu'l-Baha Abbas have been redeemed by the sacrifices of many a precious soul, they of a certainty would gladly have offered up their lives for his life. But fate hath otherwise ordained. Every destiny is predetermined, and none can change the divine decree. What am I to set forth the achievements of this leader of mankind? They are too glorious to be praised, too many to recount. Suffice it to say that he has left in every heart the most profound impression, on every tongue most wondrous praise. And he that leaveth a memory so lovely, so imperishable, he indeed is not dead. Be solaced then, O ye people of Baha. Endure and be patient, for no man, be he of the east or of the west, can ever comfort you. Nay, he himself is even in greater need of consolation. Indeed, the poor, lamenting their plight, were saying one to the other, "What will happen to us now? Who will look after us now? We are orphaned. What can we do now but go away and die?" The next speaker was Ibrahim Nasir, a celebrated Christian writer, and he said, "I weep for the world, in that my Lord hath died. Others there are who, like unto me, weep the death of their Lord. O bitter is the anguish caused by this heart-rending calamity. It is not only our country's loss, but a world affliction. He hath lived for well nigh 80 years, the life of the messengers and apostles of God. He hath educated the souls of men, hath been benevolent unto them, hath led them to the way of truth. Thus he raised his people to the pinnacle of glory, and great shall be his reward from God, the reward of the righteous. Hear me, O people. Abbas is not dead, neither hath the light of Baha been extinguished. Nay, nay, this light shall shine with everlasting splendor. The lamp of Baha, Abbas, hath lived a goodly life, hath manifested in himself the true life of the Spirit, and now he is gathered to glory, a pure angel, richly robed in benevolent deeds, noble in his precious virtues. Fellow Christians, truly ye are bearing the mortal remains of this ever-lamented one to his last resting place. Yet know of a certainty that your Abbas will live forever in spirit amongst you, through his deeds, his words, his virtues, and all the essence of his life. we say farewell to the material body of our Abbas, and his material body vanisheth from our gaze. But his reality, our spiritual Abbas, will never leave our minds, our thoughts, our hearts, our tongues. O great revered sleeper, thou hast been good to us, thou hast guided us, thou hast taught us, thou hast lived amongst us greatly with the full meaning of greatness. Thou hast made us proud of thy deeds and of thy words. Thou hast raised the Orient to the summit of glory, hast shown loving kindness to the people, trained them in righteousness, and hast striven to the end till thou hast won the crown of glory. Rest thou happily under the shadow of the mercy of the Lord thy God, and he verily shall well reward thee. The Christian writer was followed by the Mufti of Haifa, Muhammad Murad, who said, I do not wish to exaggerate in my eulogy of this great one, for his ready and helping hand in the service of mankind, and the beautiful and wondrous story of his life spent in doing that which is right and good, none can deny, save him whose heart is blinded. O thou revered voyager, thou hast lived greatly and hast died greatly. This great funeral procession is but a glorious proof of thy greatness in thy life and in thy death. But O thou whom we have lost, thou leader of men, generous and benevolent, to whom shall the poor now look? Who shall care for the hungry, and the desolate, the widow, and the orphan? May the Lord inspire all thy household and thy kindred with patience in this grievous calamity, and immerse thee in the ocean of his grace and mercy. He verily is the prayer-hearing, prayer-answering God. Another distinguished Muslim, Abdullah Muqlis, followed the Mufti of Haifa. The sun of knowledge has set, the moon of virtues has disappeared, the throne of glory has crumbled, and the mountain of kindness is leveled by the departure of this benevolent one from the mortal world to the immortal realm. I do not need to explain the sublimity of the great one whom we have lost, or to enumerate his great qualities, for all of you who are just are witnesses and can testify to what has been given him of personal beauty, beauty of his character, greatness of his heart, vastness of the sea of his knowledge and generosity. I beg your pardon if I fail in doing my duty as far as faithfulness is concerned, or if I am unable to pay the generous one who has departed what he deserves of the best and highest praise, because what my tongue utters has emanated from a tender memory and broken heart. Indeed, they are wounds and not words. They are tears and not phrases. This calamity has made all previous calamities to be forgotten, but this calamity will never be forgotten. Next, Sheikh Yusuf Al-Khattab, a Muslim poet of note, recited a poem he had composed, and he was followed by Bishop Basileus, the head of the Greek Catholic Church of Haifa, who dwelt particularly on Abdu'l-Baha's humanitarian deeds, his generosity to the poor, his charm and majesty of mien. Then came the turn of the youth to pay homage and tribute. Wadi Bustani, a young Christian, had a poem to offer. Here are some lines from it. In the souls and in the minds thou art immortal. One like thee, who has all perfections, virtues, and honors, is eternal. O Abdu'l-Baha, O son of Baha'u'llah, may my life be a sacrifice to one like thee. Thou art the all-wise, and all else beside thee are only learned. What can the poets say in thy day, O Abdu'l-Baha, O son of Baha'u'llah? Thou wert just as God wanted thee to be, and not as others wished. Thou hast departed in the Holy Land, wherein Christ and the Virgin Mary lived, the land that received Muhammad, the land the dust of which is blessing and wealth. We shall be sustained by this tomb and the one it contains. The covenant of love and devotion will remain forever between us. The eighth speaker was Solomon Bozaglo, one of the leading figures of the Jewish population of Haifa, who spoke most eloquently in French. Here is a resume of this speech. It is indeed strange that in an age of gross materialism and lack of faith, a great philosopher such as he, whom we mourn, Abdu'l-Baha Abbas, should appear. He speaks to our hearts, our consciences. He satisfies our thirsty souls with teachings and principles that are the basis of all religion and morality. In his writings and public talks, and in his intimate conversations, he could always convince the most learned and the most orthodox. His life was the living example of self-sacrifice, of preferring the good of others to one's own. The philosophy of Abdu'l-Baha is simple and plain, yet sublime. It accords with human character. Its virtues overcome prejudice and superstition. Abbas has passed away in Haifa, in Palestine, in the Holy Land wherein prophets have always appeared. The ancient glory of this land is restored. We are not the only ones who weep for him, in whom we take pride. In Europe, in America, in every country, people athirst for social justice and brotherhood also weep for him. He suffered from despotism, fanatism, and intolerance. For decades, Akka, the Bastille of the Ottomans, held him a prisoner. Baghdad, the Abbasid capital, also served as a prison for him and for his father. Persia, the ancient cradle of divine philosophy, threw out her children, whose ideas were conceived in her land. Cannot we witness the manifestation of divine will to exalt the Holy Land, that it become once again the cradle of noble and generous ideals? He who has left such a glorious heritage is not dead. He who has promulgated such great principles, is immortal in the memory of posterity. Sheikh Asad Shuqair, a prominent Muslim citizen of Akka, admired for his scholarship and eloquence, was the next speaker, after whom Muhammad Safadi, a well-known Muslim poet, read his Threnody. Sheikh Asad spoke of Abdu'l-Baha as one of the inhabitants of Akka, because these inhabitants lived with him for more than 40 years. His meetings were meetings of learning, wherein he explained all the heavenly books and traditions. His philanthropies to the widows and orphans were never interrupted. He had so great a station, yet he never failed to help the distressed. In the winter season, he met with the learned and notables of Akka at the home of Sheikh Ali Miri, and in the summer the meetings were held in a court in the Thaqlure. In both of these meetings the attendants found him a book of history, a commentary on all the heavenly scriptures, a philosophy of the pages of contemporary events that pertain to scientific or artistic topics. Then he moved to Haifa and then went to Europe and America, where he gave comprehensive and eloquent addresses and exhortations. His intention was to bring about unity among religions and sects and to remove the severe strife from their hearts and from their tongues, to urge them to take hold of the essence and let go the non-essential. He did that by presenting his message in a scientific manner. A group of Persians and others criticized him and found fault with his ideals in pamphlets they published and spread. Nevertheless, without paying any attention to their criticism and opposition, nor being hurt by their hatred and enmity, he went forward and proclaimed his teachings. It is the law of God among his creatures, a law which will not be changed, that the originator and declarer of principles must inevitably have those who agree and praise and those who disagree and reject. And here are a few lines from Muhammad Safadi's poem. On Sunday night heaven was opened, and the spirit of Abdu'l-Baha flew with its glory. It was received and entertained by the prophets. O Mount Carmel, thou art now more proud than the heaven, for thou hast become the holiest mountain. I shall weep with tears for thee as long as I am living. How often thou didst wipe them with thy hands. Funeral orations delivered, the High Commissioner stepped forth to perform his act of homage, and other officials followed him. Then came the moment when the casket which held the pearl of loving servitude passed slowly and triumphantly into its simple, hallowed resting place. Oh, the infinite pathos that the beloved feet should no longer tread this earth, that the presence which inspired such devotion and reverence should be withdrawn. Shoghi Effendi and Lady Blomfield tell us, of the many and diverse journals that throughout the East and West have given in their columns accounts of this momentous event, the following stand as foremost among them. Le Temps, the leading French paper in its issue of December 9th, 1921, under the title Un conciliateur, a peacemaker, portrays graphically the life of Abdu'l-Baha, the following being some of its extracts. The Morning Post, 2 days after his passing, among other highly favorable comments, concluded its report of the movement in the following words. The venerated Baha'u'llah died in 1892, and the mantle of his religious insight fell on his son Abdu'l-Baha, when, after 40 years of prison life, Turkish constitutional changes permitted him to visit England, France, and America. His persistent messages as to the divine origin and unity of mankind were as impressive as the messenger himself. He possessed singular courtesy. At his table, Buddhist and Mohammedan, Hindu and Zoroastrian, Jew and Christian sat in amity. Creatures, he said, were created through love. Let them live in peace and amity. The New York World of December 1921 publishes the following. Never before Abdu'l-Baha did the leader of an Oriental religious movement visit the United States. As recently as June of this year, a special correspondent of the World who visited the seer thus described him. Having once looked upon Abdu'l-Baha, his personality is indelibly impressed upon the mind. The majestic, venerable figure, clad in the flowing abba, his head crowned with a turban white as his head and hair, the piercing deep-set eyes, whose glances shake the heart, the smile that pours its sweetness over all. Even in the twilight of his life, Abdu'l-Baha took the liveliest interest in world affairs. When General Allenby swept up the coast from Egypt, he went for counsel first to Abdu'l-Baha. When Zionists arrived in their promised land, they sought Abdu'l-Baha for advice. For Palestine, he had the brightest hopes. Abdu'l-Baha believed that Bolshevism would prove an admonition to the irreligious world. He taught the equality of man and woman, saying, "The world of humanity has two wings, man and woman. If one wing is weak, then the bird cannot fly." The Times of India, in its issue of January 1922, opens one of its editorial articles as follows. In more normal times than the present, the death of Abdu'l-Baha, which was sorrowfully referred to at the Baha'i Conference in Bombay, would have stirred the feelings of many who, without belonging to the Baha'i Brotherhood, sympathize with its tenets and admire the life work of those who founded it. As it is, we have learned almost by chance of this great religious leader's death, but that fact need not prevent our turning aside from politics and the turmoil of current events to consider what this man did and what he aimed at. Sketching then in brief an account of the history of the movement, it concludes as follows. It is not for us now to judge whether the purity, the mysticism, and the exalted ideas of Baha'ism will continue unchanged after the loss of the great leader, or to speculate on whether Baha'ism will someday become a force in the world as great or greater than Christianity or Islam. But we would pay a tribute to the memory of a man who wielded a vast influence for good, and who, if he was destined to see many of his ideas seemingly shattered in the world war, remained true to his convictions and to his belief in the possibility of a reign of peace and love, and who, far more effectively than Tolstoy, showed the West that religion is a vital force that can never be disregarded. The London Times printed an obituary notice on November 30th, 1921, in the course of which it said, Abdu'l-Baha was a man of great spiritual power and commanding presence, and his name was held in reverence throughout the Middle East and elsewhere. Light dated December 3rd, 1921, appreciatively refers to Abdu'l-Baha as the head of the great Baha'i movement, which numbers several millions of followers throughout the world, all working for peace and human brotherhood. The Daily Mirror published a good photograph of the Master on December 2nd, 1921, with a short notice, and the Daily Mail, writing on December 1st, 1921, says, "The journeying forth of one of the very few missionaries of an Asiatic faith is recalled by news of the death of Sir Abdu'l-Baha Abbas al-Baha'i. The Baha'i claimed that his faith expressed the essential truth of all religions of the world." In the same article, reference was made to the Master's visit to London in 1911, and this called forth the following reply, dated December 5th, 1921. Editor of Daily Mail, Dear Sir, in your appreciative notice concerning Sir Abdu'l-Baha Abbas al-Baha'i, you refer to his visit to London in 1911 in a manner which suggests that this venerable Eastern seer preached rather than practiced the simple life. It was the privilege of Abdu'l-Baha's London friends to ensure his comfort while he was in our midst, but it would be untrue to say that he did not live the simple life himself. The present writer was the guest of Abdu'l-Baha on several occasions in the East, and was an eyewitness of the Spartan simplicity in which he lived. The Baha'i leader never possessed more than one coat. He lived on frugal diet and was ever ready to share what little he possessed with the poor. During the war, many hundreds of people in Palestine would have died of starvation had it not been for the noble way in which Abdu'l-Baha cared for them. The memory of a life so completely dedicated to the service of humanity will remain an inspiration with many millions of people throughout the world. Yours truly, W. Tudor Pole. Shohei Rabbani, the Master's grandson, reached London from Oxford midday on November 20th, 1921, and has been lovingly cared for at the home of Miss Grand by Lady Blomfield. Miss Grand and Dr. J. E. Esselmont, he and his sister, together with Lady Blomfield, sailed for Haifa on December 16th, 1921. It is perhaps not out of place to record that the British High Commissioner for Palestine, Sir Herbert Samuel, greatly revered Abdu'l-Baha and often consulted him concerning Palestine affairs. The news of the Master's death caused him much sorrow. The London editor of the New York World called on the present writer on December 1st, 1921, and sent a special cable to his paper in New York on the same evening. A short memoir of the Master's life is being prepared for the January Theosophist at the special request of the General Secretary of the Theosophical Society in London. As I write, certain memories come back to me with a strange insistence. I remember standing beside the Master in the pulpit of the City Temple, London, watching over 5,000 people, breathlessly absorbed in listening to Abdu'l-Baha's living spiritual words, and in watching his every smile and movement. I remember walking with him through the woods at Clifton, 1911, when he spoke of the coming of a spiritual renaissance within the Christian churches, or wandering along the banks of the Seine at sunset, 1913, when the Master spoke of the great war that was to come and the most great peace that would ultimately follow it. I have sat beside him at Ramla, Alexandria, beneath the palms, and while he spoke of the essential unity of all mankind. There were Christians, Jews, Muslims, Parsis, Hindus, and freethinkers sitting around him on that occasion, one and all united with the same faith and aspiration. I remember walking alone with the Master on Mount Carmel's slopes, sharing his frugal meals in his Haifa house, listening to his melodious chanting within the garden tomb, living as one of the family within Baha'u'llah's house at Acre. The friends who read these words will bring to memory many similar scenes within their own experience, and will remain ever thankful for such memories. There is no death. The Master lives in our midst, and the great spiritual work of human redemption goes forward unceasingly. Despite the apparent world tribulations of the present hour, the dawn of a new day approaches, and it is the privilege of every man and woman alive today to work serenely and faithfully for the coming of the world peace and true human brotherhood. May the blessing of the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdu'l-Baha, and all the Supreme Concourse rest upon us now and always. The narrative of Shoghi Effendi and Lady Blomfield continues. On the 7th day after the passing of the Master, corn was distributed in his name to about 1,000 poor of Haifa, irrespective of race or religion, to whom he had always been a friend and a protector. Their grief at losing the father of the poor was extremely pathetic. In the first 7 days also from 50 to 100 poor were daily fed at the Master's house, in the very place where it had been his custom to give alms to them. On the 40th day, there was a memorial feast given to over 600 of the people of Haifa, Acre, and the surrounding parts of Palestine and Syria, people of various religions, races, and color. More than 100 of the poor were also fed on this day. The governor of Phoenicia, many other officials, and some Europeans were present. The feast was entirely arranged by the members of the master's household. The long tables were decorated with trailing branches of bougainvilleas. Its lovely purple blooms mingled with the white narcissus and with the large dishes of golden oranges out of the beloved master's garden, made a picture of loveliness in those spacious, lofty rooms, whose only other decoration was the gorgeous yet subdued coloring of rare Persian rugs. No useless trivial ornaments marred the extreme dignity of simplicity. The guest received each and all the same welcome. There were no chief places. Here, as always in the master's home, there was no respecting of persons. After the luncheon, the guests came into the large central hall. This also, bare of ornament, save only for the portrait of him they had assembled to honor, and some antique Persian tapestries hung upon one wall. Before this was placed a platform from which the speeches were made to the rapt and silent throng, whose very hearts were listening. The governor of Phoenicia, in the course of his address, spoke the following. Most of us here have, I think, a clear picture of Sir Abdu'l-Baha Abbas, of his dignified figure walking thoughtfully in our streets, of his courteous and gracious manner, of his kindness, of his love for children and flowers, of his generosity and care for the poor and suffering. So gentle was he, and so simple that, in his presence, one almost forgot that he was also a great teacher, and that his writings and his conversations have been a solace and an inspiration to hundreds and thousands of people in the East and in the West. Others who followed him spoke in appreciation of the work and life of Abdu'l-Baha. The following are only a few extracts from their addresses. A voice calling aloud from Tehran echoed from Iraq, sounding in Turkish lands, swaying the Holy Land, which hearkened to its melody, and wherein it rose, developed, and deepened, till at last its reverberations resounded throughout Egypt, stretched across the seas to the west, and thence to the New World. A voice summoning mankind to love, to unity, and to peace. A voice, the source whereof, had it been anything but purity of motive, could in no wise have succeeded in sending its waves with the swiftness of lightning throughout the world. Hail to Abbas, the pride and glory of the East, in an age that has witnessed the rise of knowledge and the fall of prejudice. He who has attained the glorious summit of greatness, he whom the standards of triumph have hastened to welcome, he whose star arose in Persia, shedding its light upon the minds of men, the signs of which have multiplied in the heaven of glory, till it set in full radiance on this our horizon, he whose principles have humbled the peoples and kindreds of the world, even as Baha himself had done before him. I believe and firmly believe that he whose loss we now lament, having lived 80 years in this world below, counseling the peoples of the world with his tongue, guiding them by his pen, setting before them a goodly example by his glorious deeds, has now chosen to lead and guide them by his silence. Let us then, in our thoughts and meditations, pay our tribute to him. And though the other day at his door I made you weep, yet now it is my duty to appeal and ask you to forget your sorrow and refrain from lamentation and cease from shedding tears. Truly, Sir Abbas departed from us in body, but he ever lives with us in his abiding spirit, in his wondrous deeds. Though he has passed away, yet he has left for us a glorious heritage in the wisdom of his counsels, the rectitude of his teachings, the benevolence of his deeds, the example of his precious life, the sublimity of his effort, the power of his will, his patience and fortitude, his steadfastness to the end. The will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, entrusted to the care of the greatest holy leaf, was in a sealed envelope addressed to Shoghi Effendi. Its contents could not be made known until Shoghi Effendi reached Haifa, and it was the greatest holy leaf who sent out a cable on January 16, 1922, informing the Baha'is of the world. In will, Shoghi Effendi appointed guardian of cause and head of House of Justice. Some years before his passing, a prayer was written by Abdu'l-Baha, which carried this preface: Whoso reciteth this prayer with lowliness and fervor will bring gladness and joy to the heart of this servant. It will be even as meeting him face to face. This prayer is recited at his shrine, and it is fitting that this chapter should close with it, even as did the passing of Abdu'l-Baha by Shoghi Effendi and Lady Blomfield. He is the All-Glorious, O God, my God. Lowly and tearful, I raise my suppliant hands to thee, and cover my face in the dust of that threshold of thine, exalted above the knowledge of the learned and the praise of all that glorify thee. Graciously look upon thy servant, humble and lowly at thy door, with the glances of the eye of thy mercy, and immerse him in the ocean of thy eternal grace. Lord, he is a poor and lowly servant of thine, enthralled and imploring thee, captive in thy hand, praying fervently to thee, trusting in thee, in tears before thy face, calling to thee and beseeching thee, saying, O Lord my God, give me thy grace to serve thy loved ones. Strengthen me in my servitude to thee. Illumine my brow with the light of adoration in thy court of holiness and of prayer to thy kingdom of grandeur. Help me to be selfless at the heavenly entrance of thy gate, and aid me to be detached from all things within thy holy precincts. Lord, gave me to drink from the chalice of selflessness. With its robe clothe me, and in its ocean immerse me. Make me as dust in the pathway of thy loved ones, and grant that I may offer up my soul for the earth, ennobled by the footsteps of thy chosen ones in thy path. O Lord of glory in the highest, with this prayer doth thy servant call thee, at dawntide and in the night season. Fulfill his heart's desire. O Lord, illumine his heart, gladden his bosom, kindle his light, that he may serve thy cause and thy servants. Thou art the bestower, the pitiful, the most bountiful, the gracious, the merciful, the compassionate.